There's my spring aligned project. I actually started this last year, and I didn't make it very far into spring. We ended up moving unexpectedly, and so you'll note that there is a little bit of misnumbering on my future calendars, and I've just chosen to move forward and accept that. I feel okay with it. It doesn't have to be perfect. So I have spring 2024 and 2025 in here, but really I did almost nothing but the calendar numbering in the last year. So I made a little note of it just so I remember why all the dates are off by one. And then I just did on this side some things that were reminiscent of the season. And then, you know, these are much more seasonal types of things, where these are just overall feelings from and reminders from the calendar month. And then some things that were just sort of important. I also did a temperature check every day. There are websites that I believe AccuWeather will go back and let you search by day. You know, this is actually a little bit brighter than it's coming through on my video here. Everything's looking a little bit muted, but the colors are fairly bright here. If you kind of tilt, they're not so dark. They're supposed to be more bright, happy. There you go, a little bit more towards that bright yellow and bright pink. And so I used up a lot of my spare rub-ons and some smaller items here that were just left over, as well as some stamping. It was a great bit of stash bashing to be able to go through and do that. I think I finished up like 3 different like rub-on packs just from here. And this is a little bit more, you know, bright pink, not brownish pink or mauve. There we go, a little bit tilted that way. You can sort of see the more accurate colors. I'm not really set up for lighting here. This is pretty much the first video I've ever done. So, and then this is the start of the Simple Scrapper Aligned project for spring in here. I spent a lot of time doing alcohol inks and die cutting and hand cutting and stamping this page, and just kind of an overall spring collection of supplies as an intro page. And then these were some things that we wanted to sew this season. I went something with a little less literal. This is more of a spring memory. I have some items here that you can pull out. Combination of some Heidi Swapp stuff. I believe Graphic 45 as well, and some fussy cutting and some stamping. Turns out that stamping with white StazOn ink is incredibly sticky. That was a learning experience for me as a digital scrapbooker. I didn't realize how tough that would be to clean up, but I'm happy with the result. Also found myself a little enamored with some border punches. And again, this is more of a bright navy than once you get it up here instead of being down on my desk. You'll see there's some things I carried through the entire way. I made sure I didn't cover up. This is a Heidi Swapp folio, and I didn't, behind here are all horizontal days of the week, like planner situations. I did do my monthly, or I did some weekly date stamps up here, and those were consistent, and I never covered up this top portion, so they all felt kind of consistent in shape. Then this is some things that we're seeing around here, you know, kind of a week, sort of like mini photo walk situation. And I used some Heidi Swapp booklet foldouts to do some journaling. I used a ton of rub-ons and some extra. This was actually a cloud stamp from Catherine Pooler. And I used up some older Allie Edwards rainbow kit items here. And it felt pretty great to do that because I had them hanging around and was struggling to find a place where I could use them, as I don't do paper scrapbooking. This, I fell in love with the idea of just doing a bunch of raindrops because, well, I felt like in Virginia we had an extremely cold, rainy spring, which I'm really thankful for. And I think doing this project kind of reminded me how thankful I was for that. I know a lot of people were a little bit disappointed in how long it took to get warmer, and we're actually just starting to get warmer as we head into the second week of June. But you know, instead of it being high 90s, we were actually able to sit in the 70s and 60s all of spring. And as a Buffalo girl, I am not sad about it. I had a lot of opportunities to go outside and experience the sun and the rain this spring, and part of this project helped me with that. This was, again, more of a sort of a mini week in the life project. Some ING prompts that were part of this, kind of what's going on in spring, and had opportunity to work with some of the Allie Edwards Week in the Life products, as well as the Vicki Boutin cut and paste collection. And I just had a really good time cutting out all these tag papers and doing some stamping. Found out that I am not a real natural when it comes to enamel dots, and that was okay. Again, learning experience. They're a lot harder to get to look balanced than I originally thought. Used a ton of rub-ons on here, and again, some of these Week in the Life prompt items. I am doing Week in the Life this year, but I do that digitally, of course. So I purchased these supplies because I was really interested in the bright spring colors, and it turned out that they worked really well with the Vicki Boutin cut and paste collection. So if you're looking for a matchup, that's a pretty good place to go. Fussy Cut and Pop Dotted a lot of these. And yeah, had a good time with that. Same thing. This is a little bit more of the cut and paste. These are ING words for spring, or five senses kind of approach to storytelling in spring. And I had a really good time with this one. Again, these are all like fussy cut papers, some rub-ons, some stamping. These are kind of, if you're seeing a vibe here, these are all rub-ons that I stamped on top of with StazOn. And it was a good way to kind of use up some of my stash. Oh, look, my hair is stuck into rub-ons. That's about on brand for this house. At least it's not dog hair. Well, maybe it is. Who knows? And this was a really great way to sort of look back on spring. Things have been a little bit hectic, the world's a kind of a hectic place, and so is my life. And it was a nice way to kind of especially sound, remembering, the sound of the trains. I live near Quantico Marine Base, and also, we have a pretty thriving corridor for the trains, and even though we're very far away and we live near wetlands and forests, we can still hear some of these pretty unique sounds, and I wanted to capture those. It's my garden, the feeling of just different, like the lamb's ear plants, and the way that I could feel we moved last year, and I have a perfect vantage point for participating in spring thunderstorms from my porch. And you can still get a little bit wet, but you get to watch from over the hill as the lightning comes and the rain dumps through the wetlands. And it's really beautiful, even though I'm in a very populated suburban area. So I wanted to kind of take note of those things. This was actually a little bit of mixed media play that me and another Simple Scrapper member participated in one day. We got together and we just did a bunch of these with the jelly plates and the stencils and the glitter. And, Simple Scrapper also has within the membership a mixed media, kind of like a mini class. And a lot of those techniques are explored there. A little bit of stamping and stenciling and die cutting. Again, using up some of that cut and paste paper, Allie Edwards stamps, Heidi Swap ledger paper, kind of just using some remnants. You can see a seam down there. A lot of this was just using up some of my, some of this stash that I had accumulated. And you can see I didn't really care. I just put some layers of paper where, if it didn't have coverage, I just threw it down, and I'm not going to worry about it so much. And I barely notice it now. So again, a little bit more rub-ons from Katie Petite. And yeah, it was a great way to use up some of that stuff and kind of combine a lot of different manufacturers into something that I feel good about. This is where my book starts to get a little chunky. Being a digital scrapbooker, I don't get a lot of opportunity to play with some of these flip outs. Like here, I did use one of the Allie Edwards attachers. They're meant to do in a binder, but I actually folded it in on itself, and I kind of worked it in with a bone folder over and over again so it could not be real big. But here I decided to use some scored paper, again, some remnants, and I decided to call out some of my favorite flowers of the spring season. So they're not, had I thought about it, I probably would have arranged maybe you open it up and it looks over on this side, but what I did was I wrote, stamped with some Allie Edwards stamps, and this is actually using, I believe, the numbers, is it the numbers paper? Because it was number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4 from Allie Edwards. And I chopped up that 12 by 12 paper into 6 by 6 squares, loaded it with rub-ons. And again, using up a bunch of leftover rub-ons, some Heidi Swapp, Stop the Blur stickers that were hanging around. And yeah, I put the photos on the back. I got a new camera this spring, and I haven't had a digital camera or just a non-phone camera since, I want to say, like 2009, back when it was the iPhone 4 or whatever it was. That was the last time I had a camera. So I'm trying to get back into, or maybe for the first time, really get into photography, and flowers are a good starting point. And I had a really good time kind of going through and taking those pictures of flowers that I took this spring and putting them in here. And this was just, since it was mostly covered up, it was a great place to sort of, again, layer all these leftover papers, tons of stickers, Heidi Swapp stickers, Graphic 45 papers. I believe this is a photo play paper. Yeah, and just sort of layer whatever I had around. And I figured, as I don't do paper scrapbooking, this was kind of my last hurrah for being able to do something that was more bunny related, Easter related, even though it isn't technically Easter. And I was like, you know what, I'm okay with that. I really dig these little bunnies. So again, this is some of the remnants of that mixed media play date that I did. Lots more stenciling and texture paste, a little bit more gel plate on, you'll see this is on some music paper that was from a music, kind of like a music practice book, and torn out. And I added some rub-ons here and here. And then again, adding some Heidi Swapp stickers, some Kitty Petite rub-ons, and then Allie Edwards Week in Life items here, here, and here. I did kind of overdo it. Like, I had a whole thing here and it looked really, I did the journaling around the edge and I really liked it. And then I kind of went overboard and brought in an old Seven Gypsies stamp that I clearly had no control over. I did not know how to use it. It's been in my stash for about 25 years. And it did not really work super great on a chunky end of a notebook because, you have to be flat, and like I was kind of getting ink everywhere. But you know what? I'm just going to chalk that one up to learning and let it go. And I just layered up some rub-ons, and there was an old ticket here that I added some rub-ons to, and then this Heidi Swapp typewriter I thought was adorable in this situation. And then this is sort of just, expressing some changes that are happening as we start to transition into getting closer towards the end of the school year, and some changes that are happening in my family. One of which is the need for more sunscreen as we kind of head into these outdoor days. This, in each of the aligned seasons, there's a prompt basically about the colors that you see. And spring here, ever since I moved down to the Virginia area, the DC area, I've always sort of mentally associated spring with like soft white and pink and soft greens. I believe probably because of the association with the Cherry Blossom Festival here. And I realized, we moved again a little bit toward the wetlands and towards the, a national forest down here. And I started looking around, and that's not what spring looks like here. Spring is incredibly bold and bright. And so I took the opportunity again to use some of these Week in the Life products. And I realized, okay, I could find like a flower in my garden that was red, that was gold, that, stuff that was more green, pink, a little bit more white. I didn't have white here, but, we made it work. More green and purple. And so I wrote the names of those flowers. I sewed those all together, did a little flip up with some washi, although I do have some red line tape behind here because the book has gotten so thick that I did want to make sure that could stay. I got some wonderful OG old foam letter stamps when I went to Scrapbook Expo. Somebody had put them on the giveaway table and I was like, I can use those. And so I broke out some of my acrylic paints that I recently swatched during Stash Bash, which is another Simple Scrapper kind kind of event that we do. I believe every couple months we do a version of Sash Bash, and I had already swatched all these colors, so I matched them to some photos, which turned out again to match the product. It made me feel really great, and I had a great time. I gessoed this background because again it is an agenda style Heidi Swapp notebook, and I didn't want all the date lines running through there. And then I used up again some scraps that were on my rub-ons. I have about 4 or 5 different rub-on categories here. You can see I cut these flowers in half and layered them a la Chamel. I did some spatter. Overall though, it was really nice to kind of capture some of those. I had already kind of captured the photographs between these photos here and then my garden here. If you'll notice, a lot of these colors kind of carry through the album. Because that's sort of what spring looks like. But I want to just call attention to that, I need to be more mindful about what the story I'm telling myself about a season versus what I'm actually seeing. And then we moved in. We're almost to the end of the weekly prompts. This is Combine, and it's meant to be sort of a use some of your leftover supplies. And this was a really fun layout to do that with. I recently got a sewing machine. I'm not gonna lie, it's not because I don't sew, or it's not because I sew, but it's because I wanted to be able to sew paper. And so I saved up, got a sewing machine, and it's turned out to be helpful for sewing around the house and doing Girl Scout patches, but it also does in fact let me sew paper. So this is a Concord and Ninth card panel die. And I had actually made a Get Well Soon card for a member of my family who was struggling with cancer. And I had sent this earlier in spring. And then I had because I had to do 3 different colors to do the different flowers in the original card, I had all of these background cutouts that were still left. And so I was like, you know what, that would be really cool if I put some vellum between them and sewed that together and then put some leftover flowers in there. And I was like, yeah, and it turned out pretty much exactly how I thought. I also have a green one that's left because I had done the leaves. I'm going to probably save that for summer when things get a little bit more lime green here, and have a little bit of fun with some turquoise and green color combinations. But again, this is the Cut and Paste collection from Vicki Boutin. I used some of those Graphic 45 rub-ons that were left from this collection here. You'll see those colors kind of pull through. I did use a little bit of Simple Stories, a spring collection they had here, and that was what I had originally gotten it for these adorable little sunshine and rain kind of items. So you'll see I'm sort of separating those by color families. And then I did a lot of matching color to color here. This is actually 4 pieces of paper that I sort of just pieced together, and I'm fine with it. Like, I cut this page down and I had these cutoffs left, and I sort of was like, you know what, I'm going to extend that out. Again, these were leftover rub-ons that were on the Simple Scrap Scrapbook Expo table, and I was just like, you know what, I'm going to use all of these. These were all leftovers. This was a leftover. These Week in the Life items were really the only non-leftover pieces, and I was like, you know what, that's going to be kind of cool. I have some little chickens back there. I have no reason for chickens, but I so super love the little visual, and I was like, you know, I'm going to cover that up anyway. It's fine. And then tuck these little guys back there. But I really liked how that came out. And then I just had some kind of realizations that, lessons that I learned from spring this year. Especially how I always think of spring as a slow season. It's never a slow season. I don't know why I think it's a slow season. I think it's because it's coming off the holidays and you think like, oh, I can finally rest and just, and the world's going to be kind of waking up. And it turns out, with school and I have a young child, we have Girl Scouts, it's always cookie season. And, along with having a home that has a garden, this is actually something I'm learning, that it is an incredibly busy season as the world comes alive. And I sort of have to take time and plan for that instead of just assuming I can be a passive observer. You do have to actively plan to be in the garden and make sure that things are being wrangled. And that's something that hopefully I'm going to learn that lesson and take forth as we head into next year. I'll start a little bit earlier. And then this was the last page in spring. again, kind of like noting what is happening as we transition into summer. And I just made some notes here about how, obviously the season is coming to a close. Spring taught me a lot about really connecting with this new home. Before I lived in a townhome and we lived there for over a decade. It was lovely. And, I loved that house, but there wasn't a lot of things that we could do to it because it was connected to other neighbors. And moving into this bigger space was kind of overwhelming because along with that freedom comes a lot of responsibility, as Spider-Man would say, paraphrasing. And, there's a lot of things that we can do and that can be overwhelming, but, it's sort of like a start small situation. And I have a lot of time and a lot of, plans and ideas that, need to come forth. And then feeling a little bit more connected with this space after going through spring and sort of digging around in the garden and learning what we have here and, learning the season and learning my home together. So, that was this aligned lens. I sort of ripped out a couple pages and glued some of the last ones together because this book is chonky. It is not going to hold much more. Although I know you experienced art journalers would probably laugh at this level of chunkiness. For me, who prints off photo books for my thousands of scrapbook pages, this is chaos. Beautiful chaos, but chaos nonetheless. So yeah, thanks for going and taking a look with me. Again, this is the Simple Scrapbooker Aligned project. It is within our community. It is running its second go through this year. The community itself is leading it. And just a lovely set of prompts to make you a little bit more aware and connected to the season around you. Because, life is really fast and it can be easy to be like, oh gosh, like, how is it the end of school again? And, I took a lot of time and a lot of photos and a lot of time to think about what was happening and what was changing around me this year. And I think that this project was a big part of that. So thanks for taking a look at some of my paper scrapbooking work. I really enjoyed myself. But yeah, it's time to head back to Photoshop. Bye.